Failures in microfinance. Why touch on this topic? We felt that those of us who have been in this industry long enough and have been ready at every turn to bring up in every opportunity we had the good things of this industry. Every time we reach an additional million incremental clients, every time that we realized how low our arrears were in this industry, we were there to paint a rosy picture. We were very quick to do that. In the same venue, we feel it is just that when we do see that there are issues, that there are clear failures around us, that we bring them up to the attention of the practitioners. We do this not with the intention of pointing the finger at anybody in particular. Quite to the contrary, the study has been done totally in anonymity. No names of any organization, no names of any individual, not even the countries are listed. I can imagine that it won't be difficult for a practitioner in that country to recognize a given institution. So be it. But for the most part, we really are more interested in the lessons learned. We want to make sure that new generations, the practitioners, can then try to avoid these pitfalls moving forward. What we tried to do was to poll the practitioners, both managers of microfinance institutions, providers of technical assistance and consultants, as well as investors in Latin America, because this is a Latin American study, and try for them to give us their list in their minds of the biggest failures in the region. Out of this came a list of 20 institutions that had failed in the last 5 to 10 years. We reduced the number to 10, mostly for economic reasons. So we needed to travel to these countries. We needed, and in other cases, it was simply we didn't have access to the information. We ended up with 10 organizations. Those 10 organizations are in many ways representative of the industry. They're small, they're big, they're NGOs, they're regulated. And then we proceeded to document each one of these 10 failures the best we could. We analyzed data. We interview the main players. We interview management, either past and present. And then we interviewed investors and so on. It's interesting that I mentioned that we interview present managers. And how could we do that if these organizations failed? Well, failing does not necessarily mean that organizations cease to exist. In many ways, after a failure, organizations were reinvented. And the organization still may exist, but for all practical purpose, it failed. Its network was negative, and indeed, it required to be reinvented to exist again. The process by which these organizations were selected was, again, mostly done in practical terms for economic reasons and for the availability of data. The process was conducted by an independent third party, somebody that, while knowing very well the microfinance industry in Latin America, was not directly involved with any of the cases, which allowed for this group of individuals to be quite impartial when analyzing the situation. The interviews were conducted physically, visiting the countries, and then through phone and through a close scrutiny of every data that was available. Interviews were conducted, as I explained before, not only with the practitioners, but also with everybody, regulators and others that had anything to do with the situation. We tried to concentrate or to place each one of the failures in a given category so as to facilitate the academic understanding of the process. It is very clear that no one failure can be so easily categorized, this belongs to category B, and it was only because there was fraud, for example, that this company failed. No, obviously, fraud was the single most important element, and thus we place it in category B. But that doesn't mean that other of the reasons for a company failing were not present. Again, this is important to signal because we did try to place each one of the 10 cases in a given box, and 6 boxes were identified. And again, those 6 boxes are reasons why a microfinance institution failed. One is because the organization abandoned its methodology. 2, because there was systemic fraud, and systemic fraud to be differentiated by petty fraud. I mean, petty fraud is always happening. A cashier is always running out with some money. We're talking here of systemic fraud, totally losing control of the organization. 3 is the case of organizations that grew too fast. And again, emphasis in too fast. Microfinance institutions tend to grow very fast. Nothing wrong with that. It's when you grow too fast, when you are actually going way beyond your capabilities, that you get into trouble. Number 4 is when the design of the organization was wrong to begin with, when maybe something that was working in one country was brought to a different environment, to a different enabling environment, and it just didn't work. The 5th reason would be government intervention. And again, we're not talking here of a government that intervenes with imposing a reasonable regulatory environment, when a government is clearly doing its job by establishing clear rules of the game. No, that's actually quite good. The government should do that. And it's a prerequisite for microfinance to prosper. We're talking here when the government actually goes way beyond that, and maybe with a populist tilt to what they're doing, they try to either impose artificial interest ceilings, or maybe they try to compete themselves directly with microfinance institutions, or worse yet, when on maybe an explosion of populism, go out and make statements like the poor should not pay their loans, which then becomes very detrimental. The 6th cause would be when an organization loses its focus, loses its perspective. Because it's being successful with microfinance and has more money available to them, it just goes in a spur and just grows in too many directions at one time. And clearly, by losing focus, it's really not doing its job well, nor with microfinance, nor with any of the other areas in which it has penetrated.